I mentioned a reflection having been thrown out against 4 peers for having presumed to rise in opposition to the opinion of the 12 judges in a cause in the House of Lords, as if that were indecent. Johnson said, "Sir, there is no ground for censure. The peers are judges themselves, and supposes them really to be of a different opinion, they might from duty be in opposition to the judges, who were there only to be consulted." On this observation, I fully concurred with him, for unquestionably all the peers are, this is capital peers, P-E-E-R-S, are vested with the highest judicial powers, and when they are confident that they understand a cause, are not obliged, and they ought not to acquiesce to the opinion of the ordinary law judges, or even in that of those who, from their studies and experience, are called the law lords. I consider the peers in general as I do a jury, who ought to listen with respectful attention to the sages of the law, but if after hearing them they have a firm opinion of their own, are bound, as honest men, to decide accordingly. Nor is it so difficult for them to understand even law questions, as is generally thought, provided they will bestow sufficient attention upon them. This observation was made by my honored relation to the late Lord Cathcart, who had spent his life in Campden Courts, yet assured me that he could form a clear opinion upon most of the causes that came before the House of Lords, as they were so well enucleated in the cases. Mrs. Thrale told us that a curious clergyman of our acquaintance had discovered a licentious stanza, which Pope had originally in his universal prayer before the stanza, "What conscience dictates to be done, or warns us not to do," and etc. It was this: "Can sins of moments claim the rod of everlasting fires, and that offend great nature's God, which nature self inspires?" And that Dr. Johnson observed it had been borrowed from Giordani. It says here in a footnote this clergyman is Dr. Michael Lort. There are indeed in Pastor Fido many such flimsy superficial reasonings as there in the last 2 lines of this stanza. I said, in that stanza of Pope's, rods of fires is certainly a bad metaphor. Mrs. Thrale said, and sins of moment is a faulty expression, for its true import is momentous, which cannot be intended. Johnson said, it must have been written of moments. Of moments is momentous, of moments momentary. I warrant you, however, Pope wrote this stanza and some friend struck it out. Boileau wrote some such things, and Arnaud struck it out saying, Vous gagnerez de trois impies. Reading in French, I don't understand French, mind you. Et pardes je ne sais combien des honnêtes gens. I'm realizing I forget to translate the French from yesterday, so I'm going to have to do that, as well as this one now. Anyway, these fellows want to say a daring thing and don't know how to go about it. Mere poets know no more of fundamental principles than blank. Here he was interrupted somehow. Mrs. Thrale mentioned Dryden. Johnson said he puzzled himself about predestination. How foolish was it in Pope to give all his friendships to lords, who thought they honored him by being with him, and to choose such lords as Burlington and Cobham and Bolingbroke. Bathurst was negative, a pleasing man, and I have heard no ill of Marchmont, and then always saying, I do not value you for being a lord, which was a sure proof that he did. I never say I do not value Boswell more for being born as to an estate, because I do not care. I said, nor for being a Scotchman? Johnson said, nay, sir, I do value more for being a Scotsman. You are a Scotchman without the faults of a Scotchman. You would not have been so valuable as you are had you not been a Scotchman. Talking of divorces, I asked if Othello's doctrine was not plausible. He that is robbed, not wanting what is stolen, let him not know it, and he's not robbed at all. Quote Othello, Act 3, Scene 3. Dr. Johnson and Mrs. Thrale joined against this. Johnson said, "Ask any man if he'd wish not to know of such an injury." I said, "Would you tell your friend to make him unhappy?" Johnson said, "Perhaps, sir, I should not. But that would be from prudence on my own account. A man would tell his father." I said, "Yes, because he would not have spurious children to get any share of the family's inheritance." Mrs. Thrale said, "Or he would tell his brother." I said, "Certainly his elder brother." Johnson said, "You would tell your friend of a woman's infamy to prevent his marrying a whore. There is the same reason to tell him of his wife's infidelity when he is married, to prevent the consequence of imposition. It is a breach of confidence not to tell a friend." I said, "Would you tell Mr. says here in a footnote, Mr. Langton," it says here, naming a gentleman who assuredly was not in the least danger of such a miserable disgrace, though married to a fine woman. Johnson said, "No, sir, because it would do no good. He is so sluggish, he'd never get to Parliament and get through a divorce." He said one of our friends, again, Mr. Langton, the footnote tells us, "is ruining himself without pleasure. A man who loses a play, or who runs out his fortune at courts, makes his estates less in hopes of making it bigger. I am sure of this word, which was often used by him. But it is a sad thing to pass through the quagmire of parsimony to the gulf of ruin. To pass over the flowery path of extravagance is very well." Amongst the numerous prints pasted on the walls of the dining room at Streatham was Hogarth's Modern Midnight Conversation. I asked Johnson what he knew of Parson Ford, who makes a conspicuous figure in the riotous groups. Johnson said, "Sir, he was my acquaintance and relation." Nope, didn't get him. "Sir, he was my acquaintance and relation, my mother's nephew. He had purchased a living in the country, but not There's a word that we don't use anymore. Simoniacally. I guess that means simultaneously. Simoniacally. I never saw him but in the country. I have been told he was a man of great parts, very profligate, but I never heard he was impious. I said, "Was there not a story of his ghost having appeared?" Johnson said, "Sir, it was believed the waiter at the Hummums, in which house Ford died, had been absent for some time and returned, not knowing that Ford was dead. Going down to the cellar, according to the story, he met him. Going down again, he met him a second time. When he came up, he asked some of the people of the house what Ford could be doing there. They told him Ford was dead. The waiter took a fever in which he lay for some time. When he recovered, he said he had a message to deliver to some woman from Ford, but he was not to tell what or to whom. He walked out. He was followed, but somewhere around about St. Paul's, they lost him. He came back and said he had delivered the message, and the woman exclaimed, 'Then we are all undone.' Dr. Pellet, who was not a credulous man, inquired into the truth of the story, and he said, 'The evidence was irresistible. My wife went to the Hummums. It is a place where people get themselves cupped. I believe she went with intention to hear about the story of Ford. At first they were unwilling to tell her, but after they had talked to her, she came away satisfied that it was true. To be sure, the man had a fever, and this vision may have been the beginning of it. But if the message to the woman and their behavior upon it were true as related, there was something supernatural that rests upon his word, and there it remains.'" Oh, I like it when Johnson tells ghost stories. After Mrs. Thrale was gone to bed, Johnson and I sat up late. We resumed Sir Joshua Reynolds' argument on the preceding Sunday that a man would be virtuous though he had no other motive than to preserve his character. Johnson said, Sir, it is not true, for as to this world, vice does not hurt a man's character. I said, Yes, sir, debauching a friend's wife will. Johnson said, No, sir. Who thinks the worse of, blank here, and the footnote tells us, Beauclerk. Who thinks the worse of Beauclerk for it? I said, Lord, there's another blank, and then it says, Lord Henry St. John, 2nd Viscount of Bolingbroke, footnote, was not his friend. Johnson said, That is only a circumstance, sir, a slight distinction. He could not get into the house but by Lord Bolingbroke, I'm guessing. A man is chosen knight of the shire, not less for having debauched ladies. I said, What, sir, if he debauched the ladies of gentlemen in the county, will not there be a general resentment against him? Johnson said, No, sir, he will lose those particular gentlemen, but the rest will not trouble their heads about it. He said this warmly. I said, Well, sir, I cannot think so. Johnson said, Nay, sir, there is no talking with a man who will dispute what everybody knows. And he said angrily, Don't you know this? I said, No, sir, and I wish to think better of your country than you represent it. I know in Scotland a gentleman obliged to leave it for debauching a lady. And in one of our countries, an earl's brother, says here in a footnote, a brother of Lord Roth's, lost his election because he had debauched the lady of another earl in that country and destroyed the peace of a noble family. Still he would not yield. Johnson proceeded, Will you not allow, sir, that vice does not hurt a man's character so as to obstruct his prosperity in life, when you know that blankety blank, it says here, and the footnote tells us this is Lord Clive, was loaded with wealth and honors, a man who had acquired his fortune by such crimes that his consciousness of them impelled him to cut his own throat. I said, You will recollect, sir, that Dr. Robertson said he cut his throat because he was weary of still life, little things not being sufficient to move his great mind. Johnson, now very angry, said, Nay, sir, what stuff is this? You had no more this opinion after Robertson said it than before. I know nothing more offensive than repeating what one knows to be foolish things, by way of continuing a dispute, to see what a man will answer, to make him your butt. Angrier still. I said, My dear sir, I had no such intention as you seem to suspect. I had not indeed. Might not this nobleman have felt everything weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable, as Hamlet says? Johnson said, Nay, if you are to bring in gabble, I'll talk no more. I will not, upon my honor. My readers will decide upon... Oh, that was the end of Johnson. This is Boswell now. My readers will decide upon this dispute. So Boswell thinks he won that one. It sounds like he did. Sounds like Johnson was getting a little grumpy there. Next morning, I stated to Mrs. Thrale at breakfast before he came down the dispute of last night as to the influence upon character upon success in life. She said he was certainly wrong and told me that a baronet, it says here Sir Nicholas Bailey, lost an election in Wales because he had debauched the sister of a gentleman in the county whom he made one of his daughters invite as her companion at the seat in the country when his lady and his other children were in London, but she would not encounter Johnson upon the subject. I stayed all this day with him at Stratton. He talked a great deal in very good humor. Well, that's good. Looking at Messrs. Dilly's splendid edition of Lord Chesterfield's miscellaneous works, he laughed and said, Here now are 2 speeches ascribed to him, both of which were written by me. And the best of it is they have found out that one is like Demosthenes and the other like Cicero. He censured Lord Kane's sketches of the history of man for misrepresenting Clarendon's account of the appearance of Sir George Villiers' ghost, as if Clatteron were weakly credulous. When the truth is that Clarendon only says that the story was upon a better foundation of credit than usually such disclosures are founded upon. Nay, speaks thus of the person who was reported to have seen the vision, quote, the poor man, if he had been at all waking, which Lord Keynes has omitted. He added, in this book it is maintained that virtue is natural to man, and that if we would but consult our own hearts, we would be virtuous. Now, after consulting our own hearts all we can, and with all the helps we have, we found how few of us are virtuous. This is saying a thing which all mankind knows not to be true. I said, is not modesty natural? Johnson said, I cannot say, sir, as we find no people quite in a state of nature. But I think the more they are taught, the more modest they are. The French are a gross, ill-bred, untaught people. A lady there will spit on the floor and rub it with her foot. What I gained by being in France was learning to be better satisfied with my own country. Time may be employed to more advantage from 19 to 24 almost in any way than in traveling. I don't know what that means. Time may be employed to more advantage from 19 to 24. I guess military hours there. I don't know. Almost in any way than in traveling. When you set traveling against, or is that, I don't know. Is that some English thing I don't get? When you set traveling against mere negation, against doing nothing, it is better to be sure. But how much more would a young man improve were he to study during those years? Oh, he's just talking about the ages, 19 to 24. Indeed, if a young man is wild and must run after women in bad company, it is better this should be done abroad, as, on his return, he can break off such connections and begin a new man, with a character to form and acquaintances to make. How little does traveling supply to the conversation of any man who has traveled? How little to Beauclerk? I said, what say you to Lord Blankety-Blank? It says here, Lord Charlemont. Johnson said, I never but once heard him talk of what he had seen, and that was of a large serpent in one of the pyramids of Egypt. I said, well, I happen to hear him tell the same thing, which made me mention him. I talked of a country life. Johnson said, were I to live in the country, I would not devote myself to the acquisition of popularity. I would live in a much better way, much more happily. I would have my time at my own command. Seems like he's getting annoyed by Boswell constantly following him around. I said, but sir, is it not a sad thing to be at a distance from all our literary friends? Johnson said, sir, you will by and by have enough of this conversation, which now delights you so much. As he was a zealous friend of subordination, he was at all times watchful to repress the vulgar cant against the manners of the great. High people, sir, said he, are the best. Take 100 ladies of quality, you'll find them better wives, better mothers, more willing to sacrifice their own pleasure to their children than 100 other women. Tradeswomen, I mean the wives of tradesmen, in the city, who are worth from 10 to 15,000 pounds, are the worst creatures upon the earth, are grossly ignorant, and thinking viciousness fashionable. Farmers, I think, are often worthless fellows. Few lords will cheat, and if they do, they'll be ashamed of it. Farmers cheat and are not ashamed of it. They have all the sensual vices, too, of the nobility, with cheating into the bargain. There is as much fornication and adultery among farmers as among a nobleman. I said, the notion of the world, sir, however, is that the morals of women of quality are worse than those in lower stations. Johnson said, yes, sir, the licentiousness of one woman of quality makes more noise than that of a number of women in lower stations. Then, sir, you are to consider the malignity of a woman in the city against women of quality, which will make them believe anything of them, such as that they call their coachman to bed. No, sir, so far as I have observed, the higher in rank the richer ladies are, they are the better instructed and the more virtuous. All right. Well, it's funny. So Johnson's ahead of Boswell when it comes to slavery, but I feel like Boswell's a little bit ahead of the times with Johnson when it comes to women. Although Boswell slept around, so he's had more experience with them than Johnson, I think. So that might have something to play with it. Maybe. I don't know. Just thinking out loud. I don't know what I'm talking about. Till next time, bye from Boswell.